My name is Emily Thompson, and the night of my engagement party, I should have died. It was a perfect evening on the surface. String lights glowing, champagne glasses clinking, my fiancé Daniel smiling at my side. My mother, Margaret, had planned everything to perfection. Every flower, every song, every bite of food was part of her masterpiece, but perfection has a price. I was standing by the bar, laughing politely at a joke, when Margaret appeared, holding 2 glasses of red wine. "For the bride-to-be," she beamed, pressing one into my hand. The moment I lifted it, I knew something was wrong. The scent wasn't spoiled. It was sharp, chemical, like medicine. My stomach twisted. And then, without thinking, I saw my sister Sophie reach for her glass, and I switched them. "Ladies first," I joked, smiling as if nothing were wrong. 30 minutes later, Sophie collapsed. That moment cracked my world wide open. It wasn't just the wine. It was years of control, manipulation, and quiet betrayals I had ignored. That night, I realized Margaret hadn't just planned a party. She had nearly planned the end of me, and for the first time, I was ready to push back. The morning of the party, I already felt on edge. Margaret had been up since dawn, orchestrating every tiny detail, checking the floral arrangements, fussing over the seating chart, instructing the caterers like a general preparing for battle. I watched from the staircase, holding my coffee, wondering how a woman who could control so much still managed to make me feel so small. When Daniel, my fiancé, arrived, he kissed me on the cheek and whispered, "Deep breaths, Em. It's just a party." But he didn't know Margaret like I did. The guests started arriving around 6. The house was glowing, filled with soft candlelight, the scent of lilacs drifting through the air. There was laughter, clinking glasses, and polite chatter about honeymoons and dress fittings. But I felt like I was walking through a play, every scene directed by my mother. My best friend, Raina, had called that morning to say she couldn't come, something about an emergency. But in my gut, I knew. Margaret. Then came the moment. I was deep in conversation with Daniel's aunt about wedding cakes when Margaret appeared behind me, balancing 2 glasses of red wine. "For the bride-to-be," she cooed. I took one, feeling the smooth stem in my hand, and raised it toward my nose. That's when I noticed it. It wasn't the smell of spoiled wine. It was faint, almost floral, but with a bitter chemical undertone that raised every hair on my body. For a heartbeat, I froze. Then Sophie, my sister, slid beside me, her face flushed with laughter. "Cheers, future Mrs. Carter!" she giggled, reaching for my glass. Without thinking, I switched glasses with her, laughing like it was all part of the game. "Ladies first," I smiled. Sophie took a long sip. 30 minutes later, the room cracked open. I heard someone shout Sophie's name. Chairs screeching across the floor, glasses tipping, the sharp, panicked rise of voices. When I turned, I saw her stumbling near the bar, her face pale, her body folding like a puppet with cut strings. I ran, my heart hammering, and by the time I reached her, Margaret was already there, kneeling like the picture of a worried mother. "She probably didn't eat much today," Margaret offered calmly, dabbing Sophie's forehead with a napkin. But I saw it then, the flicker in Margaret's eyes, the tightness in her jaw. This wasn't shock. This wasn't fear. This was calculation. The ambulance came. Sophie was rushed to the hospital, and Margaret managed the crowd with flawless poise, assuring everyone it was just dehydration, maybe nerves. I went through the motions, thanking guests, hugging relatives, listening to Daniel reassure me that everything would be okay. But inside, something had cracked open. That night, I showered until my skin turned red, until the scent of wine had faded from my skin, but it lingered in my memory. I couldn't stop thinking about how easily I'd handed Sophie that glass, how naturally the lie had rolled off my tongue, how close I had come to disappearing under the weight of a single, careless sip. Lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, the questions came in waves. Why had Raina canceled at the last minute? Why had Margaret insisted on planning every detail, inviting none of my friends, keeping the event tightly within the walls of her curated world? And most of all, what was in that glass? I didn't sleep that night, And when the sun came up, I knew I had to find out. The next morning, I drove to the hospital, my hands trembling on the steering wheel. Sophie was still unconscious when I arrived, pale against the white sheets, a faint beeping tracking her heartbeat. Daniel stood by the window, his face tight with worry. "She's stable," he said softly. "They're running tests, but they don't know what caused it." I nodded, barely hearing him. My eyes were locked on Sophie's face, the memory of that glass of wine like a siren in my head. I could still feel the weight of it in my hand, the bitter scent filling my lungs. When I stepped into the hallway, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Daniel. "We need to talk." We met at a coffee shop near the hospital. He looked exhausted, running a hand through his hair as I sat down. "There's something I need to tell you," he said quietly. "I should have told you before, but 3 days before the party, your mom asked to meet me." I stared at him. "Why?" "She said it was about logistics, the guest list, the seating, the usual. But then she offered me money." The words landed like a punch to the stomach. "She told me you deserved someone more stable. She even hinted at digging into my past, bringing up the lawsuit I settled years ago. She wanted me to walk away quietly." I sat frozen, my fingers curling into fists. "Why didn't you tell me?" "I didn't want to ruin the party. You were already under so much stress." I leaned back in my chair, breathing hard. It wasn't just about Sophie. Margaret had been laying the groundwork for months, maybe years, slowly isolating me, cutting away anyone who might stand in her way. That afternoon, I called the event venue. My voice shook as I asked about security footage. The manager promised to check. Meanwhile, I combed through old texts, old emails, realizing just how deep Margaret's influence went. I called Raina next. "Why did you cancel?" I asked, skipping the small talk. There was a pause. "Your mom called me," she admitted, "said you were overwhelmed, that it was better if I gave you space. I didn't want to make things worse." I closed my eyes, the pieces clicking into place like an awful puzzle. Later that evening, I walked through my childhood home while Margaret was out. The house smelled the same, lavender and lemon polish, but the air felt heavier now, charged. In the bathroom cabinet, tucked behind vitamin bottles and face creams, I found them. 3 orange prescription bottles, all in Margaret's name, all from different pharmacies. Alprazolam, diazepam, cyclopram. My pulse thundered in my ears. When I stepped outside, the neighbor, Mr. Calhoun, waved me over. "I wasn't going to say anything," he murmured, "but I saw your mother the night of the party, out by the alley, wearing gloves, pouring something down the drain. It didn't look like wine." I thanked him, heart pounding, and hurried home. That night, an old name popped up on my phone. Gavin, my college boyfriend. We hadn't spoken in years. "I heard about Sophie," he said, "and I need you to know. Back then when we broke up, it wasn't because I cheated. Your mother had someone follow me, took photos, twisted the truth. She even called my residency director, said I was unstable. I lost everything." The bottom fell out of my world. By midnight, I sat on the floor of my apartment, surrounded by a sea of old memories, journals, letters. In one of Sophie's old notebooks, I found a torn page that stopped me cold. "I think Mom is reading my emails. She always knows things I haven't told her." My hands shook as I closed the notebook. It wasn't just about Sophie, or the party, or even Daniel. This was a pattern. And now, for the first time, I was ready to break it. 2 days later, the venue manager called. "We pulled the security footage," he said. "There's something you should see." My heart pounded as I drove over, hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly they ached. In a small back office, the manager queued up the video. The footage was grainy but clear enough. There she was, Margaret, calm, meticulous, placing 2 wine glasses on the counter. She reached into her purse, pulled out a tiny dropper bottle, and carefully squeezed liquid into one glass. She stirred it gently with a spoon, wiped the spoon clean, slipped the bottle back into her bag, checked her reflection in the microwave door, and smiled. I felt my stomach turn. The manager gave me a quiet look. "Do you want a copy of this?" I nodded. With the flash drive clutched in my hand, I drove straight to Raina's apartment. We watched the video together, the silence between us heavy. When it ended, Raina let out a shaky breath. "Emily, you were right." I barely slept that night. Instead, I dug deeper. Back at my parents' house, I searched the master bathroom while Margaret was out. I found the same 3 pill bottles, this time lined up neatly in the medicine cabinet. I took photos, hands trembling, then carefully placed everything back. As I left the house, Mr. Calhoun called me over again. "Emily, I wrote down what I saw that night just in case." He handed me a folded piece of paper. His note was simple but damning. "Saw Margaret in alley. Rubber gloves, brown bottle, poured liquid down drain, lab background, looked like chemical disposal." I thanked him and walked away, feeling the weight of the evidence pressing down on me. That night, my phone buzzed. Gavin. We met at a quiet coffee shop, the kind where nobody looks up from their laptops. "I almost didn't call you," Gavin admitted. "But when I heard about Sophie, it all came flooding back. Emily, your mom sabotaged us. She had someone take photos, told you lies, even threatened my career. I tried to explain, but every path back to you was cut off. She made sure of it." I felt a tightness in my chest. When I got home, Sophie was waiting on the couch, still pale from the hospital, a blanket around her shoulders. She gave me a long, searching look. "In college," she said softly, "there was someone I loved, Sophia. Mom found out, called her parents, threatened them. She pulled me out of school for therapy. She sat in on the sessions, Emily. She rewrote my life and called it love." My throat tightened. We sat side by side in the quiet apartment, the weight of years pressing down on us. I realized then, it wasn't just me. It had never been just me. Margaret's control had shaped all our lives like invisible wires, pulling us into place, silencing, isolating, breaking us piece by piece. But now we had names, we had faces, we had proof. And I was done staying quiet. I spent 2 sleepless nights preparing for what I knew had to happen. My hands shook as I typed out the group message. "It's dinner at my place. It's important. Please come." Daniel arrived first, carrying a bottle of wine, unsure whether this was a celebration or a funeral. Sophie came next, pale but steady, holding Raina's hand as they crossed the threshold. Gavin walked in quietly, his eyes flicking around the room, and then, of course, Margaret. She swept in like a queen, pearls at her throat, lemon bars in hand, smiling with that polished, perfect grace. "Emily, darling," she said, kissing my cheek, "I'm so glad we can all be together again." The air around the table was tight, heavy. I served the meal in silence, waiting until plates were full and conversation began to stir. Then I stood, heart pounding. "There's something we need to discuss," I said. My voice was calm, but inside my ribs felt like they were rattling apart. I walked to the TV, plugged in the flash drive, and hit play. The video flickered to life. Margaret in the kitchen at the engagement party, carefully uncapping the dropper, stirring the glass, smoothing her reflection in the microwave door. No one spoke. Sophie's breath hitched. Daniel's fork clattered against his plate. Raina's hands clenched into fists on the table. Gavin just watched, quiet, his jaw tight. Margaret didn't flinch. I showed them the photos next, the pill bottles, the neighbor's handwritten statement. Finally, I turned to face her. "You tried to drug me," I said. "Sophie drank the glass meant for me. And you? You smiled through the whole thing." Margaret's voice was smooth, controlled. "This is absurd, Emily. You've always been so dramatic, so ungrateful for all I've done." "Don't," I said sharply. "Not this time." Her eyes narrowed. "I was protecting you. From yourself, from another disaster, another failed marriage you'd blame on me." Sophie's voice broke the tension like a crack of glass. "Did you know I was pregnant that night?" Margaret opened her mouth, then closed it. "You knew," Sophie whispered, trembling, "and you still let me drink it." Margaret's mask slipped for just a moment. The room held its breath. "You don't understand," she hissed. I did what I had to do, but no one was with her anymore. That night, after everyone left, I sat on the floor, back against the couch, the quiet humming in my ears. Margaret had left in a whirl of clipped words and slammed doors, but for the first time, her absence felt like freedom. I realized then that this wasn't just about justice or proof. It was about reclaiming my life, piece by piece, breath by breath, and I knew, no matter what came next, I would never give her the power to break me again. In the weeks after the confrontation, the silence from Margaret was deafening. No calls, no texts, no surprise visits, just a heavy stillness that hung over everything. Word spread quietly through the community. Margaret stopped showing up at luncheons and charity events. Even her closest friends drifted away, unsure what to say. For the first time in my life, Margaret wasn't the center of every room, and she hated it. Sophie, meanwhile, began to heal. She started therapy, reconnected with friends, and for the first time, stood on her own. One day, as we sat together on her porch, she smiled at me softly and said, "I feel like I can finally breathe." Raina's podcast episode about our story, The Poison in the Punch Bowl, reached thousands of listeners, drawing in messages from people who had lived through their own quiet wars at home. Daniel and I, wanting something simple and free of Margaret's shadow, held a small wedding at a vineyard. 10 people, no drama, just us, promising to choose each other every day. As for me, I poured everything into a photography project called Unspoken, capturing portraits of people who had broken free from toxic family ties. The gallery show drew a steady crowd, and one comment in the guest book stayed with me. "You reminded me that love should never require silence." Months later, a letter arrived with no return address. I knew the handwriting instantly. 4 words. "You embarrassed this family." I didn't cry. I didn't call anyone. I lit a match, watched the paper curl and blacken over the sink, and let the past turn to ash. That night, I stood in the nursery Daniel and I were preparing, resting my hand on the quiet flutter of life inside me. "You'll never have to earn my love," I whispered. And for the first time in a long time, I felt free. For years, I mistook Margaret's control for protection. I thought her constant supervision, her sharp words, her quiet sabotage were just part of how mothers loved. It took one glass of wine, one bitter scent in the air, to snap me awake. That night at the engagement party didn't just save my life. It saved the pieces of me I had almost lost. Sophie, my brave sister, found her voice. Raina, my loyal friend, showed the world the truth. Daniel, my partner, stood beside me when the ground fell away. And I learned that peace doesn't come from winning a war against someone like Margaret. It comes from walking away, from building something stronger with the people who stay. We married in a quiet vineyard with no drama, no audience, just love. Sophie rebuilt her life. Raina gave others the courage to speak. And Margaret? She faded into the background, her silence louder than any apology she never gave. Sometimes I still wonder if she regrets it. But then I remind myself, it doesn't matter. Because at the end of it all, I chose to be free. As I stand now in the nursery, hand resting on my growing belly, I whisper a promise. You'll never have to prove yourself to be loved. And for me, for all of us, that's enough.